Good afternoon, everyone. Alibaba stock is one that I hold in my value portfolio. It's one of my more substantial positions. And I've always said if you can't handle the volatility in China, probably best to choose something else. I know that this isn't for everybody, but for me, it makes sense from a valuation perspective, and the potential reward to me is worth some of the turbulence and risk and volatility with Chinese stocks. Now, their price has actually surged nearly 10% lately. This is on the back of some interesting news regarding what Jack Ma is doing and what the Chinese government is doing. According to this article in Barron's, Alibaba stock is jumping as Jack Ma is buying. So the question they're asking is, should investors do the same? I happen to know that a lot of people do look at what are the insiders doing. And when it comes to Alibaba, nobody is more of an insider than founder Jack Ma, the, we'll call it, controversial Chinese billionaire. Now, there was the whole thing where Jack Ma disappeared from the public eye after being critical of the government, and that actually sent Baba stock down in what I consider to be a very interesting twist of fate. It looks like now the Chinese government is stepping in to stimulate the economy and to lift their languishing stock market. And so somehow now Jack Ma and the party are sort of aligned on this. On my Discord, somebody was pointing out that it's kind of funny that now, as shareholders of Alibaba, we are technically, well, in a sense, business partners with Xi Jinping now, thanks to this stimulus that they're doing. And I kind of retorted with, well, technically speaking, we're the people's business partners, because that's how communism works. And I sort of imagine to myself, imagine during the height of the Cold War, if we had talked about in the future, a bunch of American investors would technically be business partners or co-investors with a communist government in a business enterprise. The almost absurdity of that stuff aside, Baba's valuation, I think, is not at all stretched. So this is a growing business. I point this out every single time. Their revenue, while not growing as fast as it was a few years ago, is still on a growth trajectory, and I do think it will continue growing into the future. It may not be accelerating super fast growth anymore, but it will grow. Baba is also a free cash flow machine. Now, granted, there's peaks and valleys, and I think that's pretty normal, especially if they are the Amazon of China. They're going to have a lot of reinvestment back into the business, which negatively affects free cash flow temporarily. But on the whole, they produce a lot of free cash flow and have the ability to reward shareholders immensely with that going forward. Speaking of rewarding shareholders, they recently declared a dividend, and I actually just received the dividend last week. It's $1 per share at a yield of 1.34% and a very low payout ratio of only 14%. They also recently started doing some pretty robust share buybacks. Back in the day, when the shares were pretty overpriced, they would actually dilute to raise money, as that's a pretty cheap way to raise capital and do it without taking on debt. But now that the shares are cheap and they produce massive free cash flow, they've been buying back in order to reward shareholders and give each individual shareholder a larger stake of the business just for hanging on to our shares. Analysts, of course, consider it a strong buy, with even the lowest 12-month price forecast being higher than its current trading price. But I think this sort of doesn't consider thinking that China is just a total loss to begin with. And here's the deal. If you think China is a scam, if it's not real, the numbers are fake, that they're going to kick us out or, shut down the businesses or whatever, and you can't handle the volatility or the risk or the fear, then this investment really, there's other opportunities. But for me, I like it. My approach to valuing Baba is pretty simple. All right. If we take the trailing 12 months of free cash flow, apply a steep 15% discount rate to really beat it up. Don't give them any credit for their excellent balance sheet, and then apply growth numbers that I think most BABA investors would probably find really disappointing. You still come out with what? $105 worth of fair value. And again, this is to sort of intentionally kind of crap on them and say, well, maybe they're not as good as what some people think. Even still, at today's prices, there is a margin of safety of almost 30% and an outsized return expected. And you're not giving them credit for their balance sheet, which is exemplary again. And it assumes growth that I think most people would find extremely disappointing. And I think a lot of the people investing and a lot of analysts expect a lot better growth than this. So if you can factor in them performing poorly compared to expectations, yet you still come out doing pretty well, I think that makes the decision pretty easy. Now, another reason to kind of beat them up like this is, hey, you need a lot of juice for your squeeze because maybe there is something to all that geopolitical tension, having to endure the volatility, the risk of what does the Chinese government decide to do going forward. We can't control those things, but we can demand a higher return for taking that on. Personally, I'm all for this sort of strange partnership between American capitalist investors like myself, Chinese billionaires like Jack Ma, and, of course, the government over there. Now, it's a little bit weird, and I understand why it makes some people uneasy. But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for what they've accomplished economically over the last 30 years. In my lifetime alone, they've gone from being one of the, sort of developing economies of the world to being one of the preeminent economic powers of the world. They've got the fastest growing middle class, one of the fastest growing GDPs, and I think the fastest growing millionaires and billionaires, if I'm not mistaken. So what they've managed to do is absolutely incredible. Regardless of what you think of the policies, politics, etc., that got them from A to B, you can't help but recognize the genius of Jack Ma and the other, enterprising industrialist entrepreneurs over there. So I'll sit here and say, I want my piece of that pie. Please let me have a slice. Thanks again for watching. Let me know down below if you want a slice. If not, that's okay. It's not for everybody. Make sure you like the video to help me out in the algorithm, subscribe to the channel for more, follow my Discord, link in the description, and consider becoming a channel member. Also catch me every Saturday night, 8 p.m. on Cashflow Kings Live, link in the description. Take it easy, everyone.